All right. Hi, I'm Rick. This is actually the first talk I've ever given on web performance. I'll tell you a bit about my history in a minute. But I kind of whipped this up kind of quickly. I apologize. It's a little rough. I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit conversational and interactive. I've been involved. I'm working on Chrome for, I've been at Chrome and Google here in Kitchener for 15 years. I work on a variety of different things. And every time I've talked with web developers about web performance and I ask them, like, tell me about your challenges, I always hear this one. I want to do more web performance. My boss won't let me do it. So I thought this might be kind of a fun topic. Has anyone here ever had this problem where you want to do where you've got a boss or a stakeholder or a customer who's not willing to let you invest in the things that you want to invest in? Okay, couple. Okay. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll be fun. Just a little bit more about me. I work on Chrome. I have a bit of PTSD from this. This was during a COVID era work at home social event. It was kind of annoying, but I helped build Chrome. I'm not really an expert web developer. I'm not necessarily even an expert performance engineer. Probably a lot of you know more about the details of web performance than I do. But I was, for many years, I was the engineering director for the Blink team on the Chrome team. So if you know Chrome performance people like Annie Sullivan, Alex Russell, Yoav Weiss, Shubi Paniker, Pat Meenan, any of those people, they all reported up to me. They were in my team. So I've been involved in the performance space for a long time. And also I really helped get the Core Web Vitals project off the ground. Core Web Vitals project was kind of my baby with a bunch of these folks. And then back a couple years ago, I switched to an IC role, or I stopped managing, and now I'm one of Chrome's area tech leads. And part of my job as an area tech lead is to help us decide for all of Chrome, how do we evaluate product quality across all aspects of product quality, and how to help incentivize like our, very large organization to invest in the things that make Chrome better. So hopefully there's some overlap with what you all do. Also, I'm a bit of a citizen scientist, and I mention this because I think being a great performance engineer means you have to be a great scientist. And to me, being a great scientist means that you are always curious, and critically, you're always skeptical. A great scientist knows that your brain is always trying to trick you into thinking something is true when it's not. And you have to start from a perspective of this isn't true, and how do I disprove it? And so my science stuff, during COVID, I built a molecular biology lab in my basement. This is me using a genome sequencer to sequence the DNA of some viruses. I was in my pajamas one morning, so a little bit silly, but I feel like I'm always embarrassed. I don't have a silver ring. I saw Jeff at least you're a professional engineer, right? Any other professional engineers? Okay, you're an engineer. You have an engineer by trade. I always feel like software engineering is kind of a misnomer. Most of what we do as developers is not engineering except performance, right? I feel like a good engineer. I'll get into this in a minute. Let me get in it. So first of all, let me ask you this: what's the most common cause of poor performance? I want to shout, like, what do they see most often is the reason that some website has crappy performance? Latency, high latency, but why? What's the cause of that high latency? Sorry? File size, large files. Yeah. Okay. Render blocking scripts, third-party scripts, long round trip times, slow networks. Yeah. Jeff doing stupid stuff. Yeah, I agree. Lots of stupid stuff. Anybody else? No G-zipping. Yeah. Bad compression. Yeah.
One of the options on here, or
no? My answer is completely different from all those. At least from my experience, anytime I really dug into why is this product crappy, I think it comes back to this lack of a clear and compelling business case for making it not crappy. Like everything you just described are all symptoms because somebody didn't care enough. And in my experience, if you really want to build an excellent product, you have to solve this problem. Maybe if you're a one-man shop and you've got a real passion to it, you can, maybe you don't need this, but still at the end of the day, engineering is expensive. And if you want to do engineering, you have to think about the business. So as a director, this was part of my job, to be the interface between the business, understanding the business case, and then working with the engineering teams and trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually decide what we can prioritize and what we can't? So in this talk, it's going to be my attempt to distill some of what I've learned from managing performance teams. And hopefully some of it is relevant. I know Google is maybe a little unusual, but I think some of the core problems are actually common across all businesses, right? All businesses, believe it or not, Google has finite resources. Right. So I'm going to try to give you like a 10,000 foot view. I think, like, believe it or not, Google has finite resources, which means we have to pick and choose. What are we going to do? And that is, I think, hard to do in any environment to do well. And so I'm going to tell you a couple tips from my experience managing performance teams on the Chrome team of how we struggled through and picked like what things were successful, what weren't, how we decided how much to invest in different areas versus other areas. And I hope some of it is relevant to you. Feel free to interrupt me if you've got questions or even anecdotes where, you know, we use something similar in your organization. Hopefully this can be a little bit fun. Okay, first tip, you got to understand what actually matters most to your business. And like maybe this, you know, maybe it's obvious, but and you got to figure out how to focus on it. And so, I mean, so much of what we've done in performance work is trying to connect up what actually matters to from the user experience to the business. And what's shocked me, I've been steeped in this for years and years. And every time we do this a little bit better, I'm always shocked about how powerful the connection is, right? So whenever we, like, it takes a lot of work to invest in measuring things well. But whenever we measure things a little bit better, I find that we're always surprised to learn, oh my goodness, now that we understand this, we understand that it's really worthwhile to do X, you know? So I think you have to start by saying, go around and figure out what matters to your business. So I've got a story on this. Most browsers have this feature called BF Cache, where the browser remembers the page, and if you navigate to a new page, you can click back, and it doesn't reload the page. It just has the page ready there. Safari's had this forever. This is Firefox's, like they had it since Firefox 1.5 in 2005, and Chrome didn't have this feature for a long time. And it's kind of weird to say, like, why didn't it have it? And you know, there's a technical argument, that architecturally this is a really complicated feature because it intersects with every other web platform feature, and if browsers like Firefox, you know, at the time we felt it was like relied on a lot of heuristics, and it was complicated to figure out how to do the web standards for it. And so, but the fundamental reason Chrome didn't have this is we didn't have a business case for doing it. We knew it was going to be expensive to build it. To build it well, we knew it was going to be expensive, and we didn't have a business case for doing it. And so for years, we just said, yeah, we know other browsers have this. It's kind of a nice feature, but we don't have it in Chrome. But there was one engineer, his name is Kentaro Hara, who really believed that this was an important feature for browsers to have. And he worked on it for some period of time, you know, with lots of skeptics saying this is a waste of time, don't waste your time on it. Until at Google, anyone want to guess like what actually matters to Google's business? Anyone looked at Google's financial statements? Ads? What ads? Search ads. That's right. Yeah. Display ads are small, search ads are huge, right? So the search business, like Google's a business like any others, at the end of the day, has to do some prioritization based on revenue. And like, so when we're trying to figure out, should we make this huge investment in BF Cache or shouldn't we? The decision was, let's try to race as fast as we can to be able to do an experiment with search and see what impact does having BF Cache have on people's behavior on search. And wouldn't you know it, you know, they tried to hack up something as quick as they could just so they could get out there and do an experiment on search. And oh my God, when BF Cache exists, people search a lot more and they click on a lot more ads. And suddenly we looked like complete idiots for spending a decade without this feature. We were basically throwing away probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year because we thought this feature was too much work. And so this is maybe an extreme example, but I've seen this pattern over and over again, where if you really study and you're careful and you try to understand, okay, what matters to the business, and we didn't start working on it. Kentaro didn't care about search ads. That's not why he worked on this, right? He thought this would be a great browser feature. Wouldn't it be cool? Other browsers have it. This is a nice thing for users, you know. And if you just justify it from that perspective, you know, you might not get the buy-in to go, hey, I need 7 engineers for 2 years to really do this well, right? It's hard to get the buy-in for that. But if you ask yourself, how can I quickly test whether this is worth it for the business? And then you find not only is it worth it, it's probably worth 1,000 times it, right? And we're idiots for not investing in this. So I think, to me, that was a really powerful story. And then once you've done that work, now it can sustain a virtuous feedback loop. I don't know if you follow the features we ship in Chrome, we're still making BF Cache better. We still, for years later, we shipped this, by the way, in 2022. So only, 17 years after Firefox. But, you know, we did finally ship it. And every year we've made it better and better. And we work to, because there's all these heuristics about, oh, if your page has an unload handler, then you can't have BF Cache, right? And because we know it's so valuable, not just to the user experience, but we see that when users are having a better time, they engage more, they stay longer, they abandon less. And that's valuable enough to Google that we can continue to fund an ongoing team that's just continually trying to make BF Cache better and better. The other tip I would say here is, like, back to this idea of being a scientist, it's really important to be curious, right? I think it was great to have people passionate about wanting to do this feature, but the thing that made this actually work for us was to say, well, we need to measure how does it change user behavior when they have a BF Cache feature? Because at least we didn't know that. Maybe Firefox did. Maybe we were dumb for taking so long to figure this out. But it took some effort to measure. So curiosity is key, and figuring out how you can move really quickly to get that first experiment to justify. I think there was a real chance if we'd taken longer to get to our experiment, I think the project might have been killed, because a lot of people thought it wasn't worth all the work to do this project, right? So rushing to say, how can I quickly answer the key question of how much investment is this project worth is really valuable. Any comments or questions on that before I move on to another tip? Go ahead. How did it cost Google hundreds of millions of dollars? Because once we shipped it and could measure the impact it had on user search behavior, we saw that users of search, when they had BF Cache, because what it means to the user is they click on the search result, they go to a page and they say, oh, this isn't quite the right one. They click back, they get back to the search results, and they click on another page. Turns out with BF Cache makes that journey going back faster. And therefore users are more engaged and they don't abandon their information search as often. And as a result, they end up searching more and they end up clicking on ads, search ads more. And Google makes, I don't know, you can look at the financials, so whatever, tens of billions of dollars a year on search ads. So like a small improvement to search ad click rate is a substantial amount of money that justifies a lot of this kind of engineering. That make sense? Yeah. Oh yeah, and the beauty of this is, like, we didn't build it for search, but because we built this general feature that we thought was just good for engagement, now once we've built it, other people can go and measure and see, like, so now there's a bunch of case studies. And so people like Yahoo Japan have found that they were able to increase their revenue substantially as a result of BF Cache. And then they want to do things on their site to help BF Cache work better and whatnot. So like actually doing the work and making it easy for others to measure ends up kind of being this virtuous feedback cycle that can improve the user experience over and over again. Okay, next tip, invest in retrospectives. Sometimes what I described, what happened with BF Cache, it's not always easy or possible to do an experiment up front and measure in advance. There's one feature in particular that sticks out in my mind called stale where we validate. I'm sorry, that's a punchline. I'll get to that in a second. Stale where we validate. Does anyone know what that is? Anyone heard of stale where we validate? Henry, I see. I know Jeff does because we were just talking about it. But Jeff had to look it up. So, it's a HTTP caching feature that lets you say cache control stale or validate, which says that even if this resource is now stale, it's outlived its cache lifetime, use it anyway up to some maximum, and refresh its cache in the background. And this was, I think, being discussed in IETF circles like around 2015 or something like that. There was a bunch of discussions around it. On Chrome, we had made a couple attempts to try to implement it, and it was really complicated, and people weren't sure if it was going to be worth it. I had someone who, again, worked in the Google search team telling me that he was convinced that stale where validate was going to be really valuable. And I had a bunch of teams were saying that it's going to take us 2 years to be able to even test this. It's not worth it. But I found an engineer who came up with a way to do it, to implement kind of a simpler version of stale where we validate and implement it quickly. And we said, okay, let's ship it anyway. And when we tried to measure it and we couldn't really see much difference, and we're like, okay, maybe this isn't that big of a deal, but since we found a cheap way to do it, let's ship it anyway. Because some people are telling us they think it matters. This was in 2018 by the time we did it, time we were experimenting, and I think we shipped in 2019. But then we still had this big open question. Okay, we did this work. Should we just move on? This person who was telling me he wanted this, he got it now. Is that good enough? Should we just move on? And in this case, I insisted, and I said, no, look, this is a really interesting question. Does this caching performance matter or doesn't it? And so we chose to add a bunch more time to the project and do a 1% holdback, where we say, okay, 1% of our users don't get this feature. And let's do basically a long-term experiment and see what's the difference for these 1% who don't have it from a control group of 1% of users who do have it. And we did this experiment with the Google Ads team, the display ads team. So this isn't search ads, this is across the whole web. And what we found with that team was that, yes, it mattered to ads performance. Ads loaded about 0.5% ads loaded a few milliseconds faster. I forget the exact number. It was like maybe 10 milliseconds faster on average. That translated to 0.5% increase in ads revenue, which you could say, okay, does this matter, doesn't it? Well, at the time, 2019, this translates to about $100 million. And the part I was most excited about was that $70 million going to publishers all over the web because of this feature that we landed. Because the Google Ads revenue split, 70% goes to the publishers, 30% goes to Google. So Google made $30 million a year on this feature, and publishers on the internet making $70 million a year because we did this feature that, again, we didn't know if it was worth doing or not. And we proved, oh, this paid for itself like 100 times over or more so. And again, we wouldn't have known that if we didn't take the extra time to do a retrospective afterwards and say, we need to really measure this and understand it. Because once you understand, you know, this is what it was worth. Now it influences how you think about how you prioritize future projects. Make sense? Any questions or comments? Go ahead.
So when I use an ad blocker in the website, so the Google ad doesn't show, like, and when I use the browser, which has the Epic added, like Brave browser, so the Google ad shows how the Google is bypass ad blocker to Google ads.
How is Google? So you're saying if you use an ad blocker, the ad doesn't show, and you're using a different ad blocker, like a different browser, and the ad does show. How is Google bypassing the ad blocker? It would depend. I mean, I don't think Google is actively trying to bypass the ad blocker, but ad blocking is all heuristics, right? It's like, if you ever look at the rules for an ad blocking system, it's like for example, I had one once. We had this crazy bug where I think it was some part of like Google Docs or something, where they were saying like some tiny fraction of our users are saying the site doesn't work at all. What's going on? And it took us forever to try to debug it. We couldn't reproduce it. And it turned out that there was a JavaScript file name that was like a hash of something. And if the file name happened to end in AD, which is hexadecimal letters, then an ad blocker was blocking it because, oh, this is a JavaScript file that ends in AD. It must be an ad, right? So like 1 in 10,000 users were having their web page broken because the ad blocker, this particular ad blocker, thought this sounds like an advertising file, right? So in general, ad blockers rely, and I know there's an easy list that many ad blockers use that is common, but it's all different heuristics, and there's a trade-off there, right? Like some of the heuristics, some ad blockers will have to inject a lot of script that actually spend a lot of CPU time figuring out what is an ad, what isn't an ad, where other blockers can operate faster as a declarative set of rules, right? So it's complicated. All right, next tip. I've talked a lot about the importance of measurement, and I'm sure anyone who's worked on web performance knows this. But maybe the thing I'm most proud of, I mentioned before that Core Web Vitals was kind of my baby. Back around 2015, we were doing a lot of different things for performance in Chrome, and there was lots of different ideas of how you measure performance. And it was quite common that a team would go do some performance, do a performance project and figure out how they wanted to measure performance for themselves. And then when it was done, they'd say, oh, look, this number I came up with is better now. This is great. But it turns out having good measures is really expensive. Like if you want to build a good metric that you trust, like if you've ever built a performance metric, you know that the first time you get data, it's bad data. It's wrong, right? And you look at the metric and you say, oh, it regressed. Why did it regress? And then you dig into it, and inevitably it's, oh, there was something wrong with how we were computing the metric. It's not real, right? So like investing in creating metrics is expensive. And so one of the most powerful things that you can do is figure out how to pool those investments. How to say, instead of each of us independently figuring out how to measure performance for our website, why don't we try to come up with some metrics that are pretty good for all of us? And this is really part of the idea behind Core Web Vitals. Concretely, early on in Core Web Vitals, someone had done an analysis of what seemed to be happening for web performance for the web as a whole. And it looked to us as if as browsers were getting faster and networks were getting faster and devices were getting faster, you'd think the web should be getting faster, right? Well, it turns out, at the same time, websites are getting heavier. They're having more script. They're involving more things. And what really was shocking to me is those things seem to exactly even out. The actual, over a period of like 5 years, the actual end user experience of the web in aggregate was holding constant. And if any of you have studied systems theory, like I still get goosebumps thinking about that, because as soon as I saw that, I realized this is a hallmark of a system in dynamic equilibrium, right? A system whereby probably what's going on here is site owners have a certain tolerance for their sites getting crappy. And if the site gets beyond a certain level of crappiness, they'll invest in fixing it. But if we make the browser faster, what we're doing is we're creating headroom for the site to get crappier, right? And so the system is in dynamic equilibrium. So all this work we're doing to make Chrome better, wait a second, it's not actually making the user experience better in aggregate, because it's just saving some developers from having to fix their regressions, basically. And so it was out of that insight that we said, okay, how do we actually shift this dynamic equilibrium? And we founded a team that we called Chrome Speed Metrics to work on. First step is we need really good metrics that are high enough quality that lots of people would want to use them to help themselves prevent regressions. And this is where at the time we already had FCP, first contentful paint, if people know about. Shubi Paniker came up with this metric already, but we knew it had a bunch of problems, and so we were trying to improve it. And so we did a lot of work to try to figure out what's a better way of reasoning about page load time and what a good metric would be that would work for page load time as a whole. And we invested a lot. Here's one example of a bit of a bake-off we did between a bunch of different metrics. And I won't go through all this data, but we were comparing how different ways that we might measure page load time are correlated with each other. And we were trying to use that to try to decide what are the properties of these different ways that we might improve on FCP. Sorry, let me just go back to my notes. And this was a lot of work. I think it ended up being probably, it was a few engineers, working for, a year or two really until we really got LCP to a point that we thought it was a high enough quality metric. And by the way, my secret hope the whole time was, what would it take to make a metric that is good enough that Google search would be willing to use it in search ranking? And we knew that if we want to alter this equilibrium and actually make the web better for everyone, pulling in the SEO world would be a powerful way to do that. And so now at the same time, Chrome was going through a bit of a change. Google was going through a bit of a change. We weren't hiring as much. Google wasn't kind of the infinite money printing machine that it used to be. And leaders were starting to say, I don't, just because you say this makes Chrome faster, I don't trust that it's worth doing. And so there was a lot of people who were in kind of wringing their hands saying, oh, what I used to do to be successful is no longer successful. It's not good enough to just do something that makes Chrome faster. And we got kind of lucky with the timing, because right around this time, we already invested like over a year in coming up with LCP. And we were just starting to do business analysis of how does LCP correlate with different business metrics. And those were starting to look really positive, like a lot of different websites, a lot of like search, but Google websites, but also non-Google websites. People used them more when the LCP was better. And the more we saw that, the more I was able to convince my boss, the VP at the time, that actually anybody that did something that made LCP better was probably worth doing. And so we got to the point within the Chrome team where even though it was no longer okay to just work on anything that was labeled speed, if you were working on something that improved LCP, and by a meaningful amount, if you were moving LCP by a meaningful amount, that became a project that was valued. And this ended up actually really changing our organization, right? Before this, we had all these fractured performance teams that approach performance in different ways. And I would say that the Chrome team got, there's still lots of different parts of performance that matter. Obviously, page load performance isn't the only one, but it really helped us to be able to have a common measure. And critically, if you can do it, it's really helpful to have different people who are responsible for measuring how good something is from the people who are responsible for improving. It's just like in science, right? You don't really want to peer review your own paper, because you have your own biases, right? So if you can instead have a different set of peer reviewers who are saying, how useful is this? And then you have an objective way of weighing, okay, this thing took us a year and bought us, 10 milliseconds of LCP at the 95th percentile. And this thing took us a week and it bought us 5 milliseconds of LCP at the 90th percentile, right? The second thing is probably a better ROI. We should do more things like this. That was really helpful for us. Oh, and of course, the other thing is, when you have a good set of metrics like this, the first step, the most important step is before you can even talk about how are we going to improve, sure you've heard all this before, but first step is you got to stop regressing, right? If you can't even have confidence that you're not going to make things worse over time, then you're never going to have confidence that you can make things better over time. And a lot of the work that you need to do to make things better comes from first doing the work to keep things from getting worse. So sometimes I found when I've had bosses who have come to me and said, we don't think it's worth improving this, stop working on it. I've said, okay, it's fine. I can understand it's maybe not worth improving this. How much are you willing to let it regress? And sometimes they say, oh, what do you mean? I don't want it to regress. I was like, oh, so you want us to keep doing 70% of what we're already doing then, right? No, just stop working on it. Okay, it's going to regress. Like every single software project in the world, if you're changing it, it is going to get slower unless you continue to invest in measurement and monitoring. And so oftentimes where I found it hard to get approval to work on a project to improve performance, I have not found it nearly so hard to get approval to work on not regressing performance. At the end of the day, those are kind of the same thing. Right. And so now fast forward, hopefully a lot of you know, there's tons and tons of case studies about the business impact of Core Web Vitals. And, you know, it's not always perfect metrics for every site and every use case. But in general, we see that LCP correlates very well with business metrics for a lot of variety of different websites. FID, which has now evolved into IMP. We've got some good evidence of it correlating. CLS, the evidence is weaker, but there's some decent evidence there as well too. So I think this idea of pooling our investment in a set of metrics that are pretty good for a wide variety of use cases, I think really has paid off. Any questions on that or the early history of Core Web Vitals before I tell you one more Core Web Vitals story? Yeah.
Is this case we're moving away from like you already had a meaningful pain weight and then why develop LCP?
Yeah, right. We had FMP, first meaningful pain. Why develop LCP? We had a lot of problems with FMP. There was, and I forget all the details, but there was a bunch of reasons why. There were a number of properties that we were looking for, including I can't remember if I'm sorry, I forget the details of how FMP was defined, but a few properties we wanted. First of all, we didn't want it to be easy to game. And I think FMP was one. If it was something that we wanted to be in search ranking and have a ranking effect, if there was some easy way to just trick it, that was going to be a big problem. So that was one. I think elasticity might have been one of the other ones, right? For a great metric, you want the property where you invest a little bit and the metric gets better a little bit. You invest a little bit more and the metric gets better a little bit more. A bunch of the candidates we considered, and I can't remember if FMP was this or not, but a bunch of the candidates we considered had these cliffs where it's like, well, you could invest a whole lot and the metric would kind of stay constant until you hit a point and then the metric would improve by a bunch. And that's really bad for like a continual feedback loop of trying to incentivize ongoing investment. And then I think there was also an understandability concern. One of the trade-offs that we were optimizing for with the Core Web Vitals was we wanted metrics that developers could reason about and could understand what it meant. And there's a trade-off there with, I think, like if you look at something like speed index, right? Speed index is a great metric, but it's hard to reason about. What exactly does it change in 0.2 on the speed index mean, right? And this isn't important just for web developers, but again, going back to the whole like theme here, we want to help you by helping you have something that you can explain to your less technical bosses, right? And so I think FMP, like what exactly is meaningful? Does this matter? Doesn't it? We tried with largest contentful paint, LCP, we tried to say, really, we're just conceptually, what LCP does is it just tells you when the most prominent thing on the page shows up. And that simplicity, it's a trade-off. You lose some things with that simplicity, but one of the things you buy is it's easy to reason about. And so I think that was one of the reasons. But also we found, I think FMP, like some of these correlation studies we did, we were finding that FMP wasn't correlating with things that we knew mattered as well as we wanted. Is LCP the main vital? Yeah, I would say so. We designed the Core Web Vitals. If you ever heard Annie Sullivan talk about this, she does some great talks on this. She talks about them as a three-legged stool. Part of the idea was like we knew page load time really correlated with things like abandonment, engagement, that sort of thing. So we knew it was important to have a page load metric. That's what the web had long had. But some of the ways you might try to juice the page load metric might cause other problems. So for example, if you do a lot more server-side rendering and like late hydration, that might mean you're running a whole lot of script before your UI is interactive, right? And that might result in a bunch of jank during loading. And so that's exactly what FID was designed to capture. Is to say, well, if we're incentivizing getting bytes on the, pixels on the screen faster, we better have a balance there that tries to make sure you don't hurt the user experience in some other way. And then I'm about to tell you a story about CLS, but CLS also plays into this three-legged stool in the sense that, and it's funny actually, sometimes we see that when you make a web page load faster, the CLS gets worse because early on in the web page loading, there's all this loading and getting things ready. And if that wasn't actually getting drawn, right? If it was like we have this paint holding feature, we don't actually draw until a certain time, or if you had render blocking, if you had a lot of render blocking resources, all that CLS might be masked and hidden, right? So it's, oh great, you fixed that problem where things were taking so long to show up on the screen, so you get your FCP sooner, your LCP sooner, but now you're exposing all this layout jank. And is it really better, like a news article that shows up 3 seconds in and it just sits there and is stable versus a news article that shows up in 1 second and jumps around for 4 seconds? Is that latter really better? Probably not. So we need the CLS there as kind of another leg on the stool. So if you're asking about how this works, the question was, just for the recording, the question was, how exactly is LCP measured as it's coming in? And so if you're using the Paint Timing API, which is the JavaScript API you can use to learn about FCP, I believe the way it works is you'll actually get these LCP candidates, right? It'll tell you, so LCP is the largest contentful paint, right? So the first time something draws on the screen, that's a candidate. And then, 20 milliseconds later, something bigger draws. That's a new candidate. And that's your new largest one, right? And at some point, you got to decide, am I going to get one any bigger? And so I think there's a heuristic in there where it's something like, if we haven't got a new largest one in 2 seconds or something like that. But and this depends a little bit on the implementation. I think there's a heuristic. If you use the CWV JavaScript library, I think it has like this timeout like this, where if it hasn't seen a new largest one after, I think if it waits until the load event fires, and then it waits some additional number of seconds or something, and then it says, okay, the biggest one I've seen by now, that counts as the largest one. I think in Chrome, our implementation, if I remember correctly, actually will handle the case where you have a larger one that occurs much later. But in all cases, as soon as the user interacts, as soon as the user hits a key or something like that, we say, okay, we're done waiting for the largest thing to show up. It's no longer page load once the user's starting to interact. And we just say whatever the largest one was by this point counts. All good? Yep. Any other questions about LCP or early Core Web Vitals history?
As the web moves into like this more agentic experience of where what happens on the page initially doesn't really mean anything to the end user, like as people thinking about different ways to score pages and the value of web vitals in comparison to actually providing meaningful information that gets generated by agents or AM along those lines, like it's a game the system by making sure that their web vitals were good, which would help them rank. But now it's like there's a bunch of things out there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's obvious, like, I don't think any of us would ever say the most important thing about a page is how quickly it loads, right? Like how useful it is. Like you can load a crappy page and that's not, so obviously for something like search ranking, right? Performance has been at most a small factor in search ranking because other things matter a lot more. You're asking about with agentic. I mean, I personally still believe like these metrics are rooted in human psychology, right? Like even, okay, we're now used to having to sit to wait for a chatbot. Still, I'm confident that chatbots that respond quicker are going to get more engagement than chatbots that respond more slowly. Interestingly enough, if you look at, we have this Crux report where you can see Core Web Vitals data for all of Chrome users. You can go and look up the Crux data for Google.com, and you can see how Google.com has done on LCP. And if you look closely and compare some timelines, you'll see that when AI mode came out on Google search, LCP regressed. And that's because AI mode has like a spinner, and it waits to load, right? And we're like, we track overall Core Web Vitals in Chrome, and we saw a big regression. We were quite sad to see that LCP had regressed overall in Chrome because of AI mode. But I think it's legitimate. I think if AI mode is going to be the biggest thing on the screen, sorry, not AI mode, AI answers, right? AI mode's a separate tab. But if the AI answer is going to be the biggest thing on the search results screen, then it's reasonable to say it's the most important thing. And yes, if you're a user who wants to wait till you see that before you engage with the search page has gotten worse. But if the information is more useful to you, it's gotten better in that respect. So I think in that case, we accepted, hey, this was a good trade-off. The product is better, even if the LCP is worse. Now, hopefully we can figure out how to make these AI answers come up faster so we can get our LCP back. But absolutely, there's a trade-off there. So the question is search results, are they changing? They're different on different geographies based on expected network conditions and that sort of thing. And are things like AI answers, are we rolling those out globally despite the network conditions? And I'm not sure. In general, the advice definitely is like performance is always this trade-off, right? There's a functionality richness trade-off. And it's certainly the case that there are Google products that will choose and say, oh, based on the device capabilities or the network quality or something, I'm going to choose a more limited user experience in its trade-off for something that's faster. And so I think that's a common trade-off. I don't know what exactly search is doing with AI answers, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear that there are scenarios where they just decide, oh, we're going to skip the AI answers in this case. But in the case of AI answers, it's a property of the server, right? All the computation is happening on the server. So I wouldn't imagine that there's a good reason to delay AI answers, but there's other features that I imagine would be like some of these really rich graphic intensive tiles, right? Maybe you're not going to send that to someone who you can tell is on satellite connection, for example, right? I would totally expect there to be things like that. Okay, I got one more story for you. And my tip here is, even when the business priorities seem weird to you, you should try to make sure you understand them and don't resist the pressure that you're under to try to optimize for them. So I'm going to tell you about so people know about CLS, cumulative layout shift. Well, no, I'm seeing some nodding, right? So this was our metric to try to measure things moving around on the page. So the history of this is that this was, I guess, 2018 or something, that AMP had come out, and AMP's whole goal was to try to improve the quality of the user experience of the web by having these kind of light web pages that always loaded quickly and never had text jumping around. And so I went to the AMP conference in Amsterdam in, I think it was February 2018 or something like that, and just trying to understand, I think that goal of how do we make the web have a better user experience, you can say what you want about AMP, there's lots we can criticize, but I think that goal was very a goal that we can all relate to. And I went out for dinner with Malte Ubel, the tech lead from the AMP team, after the AMP conference, and we were brainstorming about how might we take the things that AMP had learned and kind of evolve web standards out of them. How might we take some of these lessons? And we spent a lot of time saying, what would we have to do to the web to make it so it was impossible for text to jump around? Wouldn't it be great if we just had a setting that pages could opt into? That was the no layout jank setting. And it seemed really hard. And we're like, man, you have to throw out all this stuff. AMP doesn't let you write your own script. It's really constrained, and I was still trying to figure it out until he told me a secret. He said, Rick, there's a dirty secret. All of our marketing stuff for AMP says that AMP doesn't allow text to jump around. It's a lie. It's actually just probabilistic. It's just hard for text to jump around. It's not impossible. And I said, oh, maybe the solution then isn't an absolute. Maybe it's not an on-off. Maybe this is just like performance. Maybe it's a metric. Maybe we should design a metric that measures how much jank there is and treat that just like we treat page load time. And so that was that conversation. People talked about layout instability, and I'm sure people had talked about measuring it in the past. But this was a place where I didn't think this text jumping around problem was all that important. I was a performance guy. I was focused on performance. What does text jumping around have to do with performance? But because I knew search cared about it, and it was something that AMP was built to solve, I went back to the Blink team and I said, I want you to explore building a metric for measuring text jumping around for layout jank. And a lot of people said this is crazy. Like, we've never built a metric like this. It seems really hard. And we started building it, and it was really hard. I don't know if any of you were involved back then. The first couple of versions of it we shipped were buggy. There was all sorts of ways that it was incorrect. We got lots of feedback from lots of you telling us the CLS makes no sense. And we had a couple engineers, I think, work on it for a couple of years. I remember there was a point where we had a code red where we had a whole bunch of people all piling on, trying to fix all these bugs in CLS. And in the end, I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of about Core Web Vitals is we ended up applying our performance discipline to this area of UI quality that was not performance at all. It was UI quality. And I think it mostly worked. You can argue CLS isn't perfect by any means. But in the end, it meant that we had a measure for this UI quality piece that I think we can see that the web got meaningfully better once we launched CLS in Core Web Vitals. And people say that, yeah, web pages with lower CLS are more pleasing than those with high CLS. So this was one where I never would have been willing to make that bet and invest in this space if I didn't have the pressure of something like AMP saying this really matters to us. And so that's my tip. Just because it's outside your comfort zone and something that other people are telling you matters to them and you think has nothing to do with you, it's worth it sometimes to try to dig in and try to understand what would it mean to actually try to care about this as much as you seem to care about this. Yeah, and this is, I guess, just some information about CLS, which you've probably seen. So putting this all together, there's going all back through the tips I've gave you. Like, first of all, if you want to have a great performance culture, you have to have this flywheel feedback loop, right? You have to always be thinking, what do my stakeholders care about? Whether they're my clients, my bosses, whatever, what do they really care about? And what do I need to optimize for in order to make them happy? And what's the ROI, right? How am I going to maximize the return on investment? What's the minimum amount of work I can do to get the maximum value for the things my stakeholders care about? And then build a system that lets you actually iterate on that and try to pool your engineering resources as much as possible so that you're not always reinventing the wheel. Ideally, you can find other people to pool with. So for example, hopefully what we've done with Core Web Vitals, hopefully the things we've built into DevTools are useful for you. If they're not, find some way to build things that are useful for as many people as possible so that you can pool the costs and investment. And then do your work to actually really evaluate. And even when you've launched something and you think you're done, resist the temptation to just move off and forget about it. The most important part in any flywheel is actually making sure you've learned the lessons that this stage has taught you, right? Do evaluate, understand what you've learned from it, and now you can apply it to your next thing. And then you can get this virtual cycle of every time you do a new project, you're tuning your ROI and getting better and better, like a good scientist would. And then you will have this flywheel where you're not just having to ask for permission to make your experience better. You're getting people coming to you saying, more and more, do more of this, please. And this is what I've seen in my experience in Chrome. And it's been a lot of fun when you get that position. By the way, this happens specifically with BF Cache, right? It started where most people were telling us, stop wasting your time. We don't need this. And once we actually did the work and saw the results on search, I think we did it for desktop only first. And then we had VPs in the company coming to us saying, please, will you expand BF Cache? Will you bring it to other platforms? And it's great to be in that position where you're asking, like, in any environment, you're going to be in a position where people are coming to you saying, what can we do? Let's throw money at you. Can we make your team bigger? Because we want more of what you're giving us. And it's a really fun position to be in if you can set it up that way.